name's Corrine. This is Dr. Jones.
Hi there.
He likes to be called Gary, which I think is just so warm and fuzzy and so rare for a doctor. So we're really glad you're here. One of the things we want to make this is extremely interactive. You've probably been talked at a lot today, yeah? Like people just kind of vomit everything you need to know on you. And I'm such an advocate of what you're doing that I know the answers are a little more personalized than maybe what you've been given. And when you're navigating this, you kind of need to know how this works for you, right? So what we'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about the process, IVF with a surrogate, with an egg donor, and then also just kind of walk you through some of our commonly asked questions. You know, I've been doing this a long time, and Dr. Gary has as well. And so if there's something that maybe you're not quite sure about, you're always welcome to ask while we're talking. We've got 18 minutes here, and I'm going to keep us punctual. But if there's something maybe after the fact that would be important to you, we have probably one consult time still available today, and we do offer consults after the fact as well as just, we'll be around, so just come find us, okay? Also, just one more thing of housekeeping. If you need an informational booklet, there's a really great part on the back that will walk you through the process. Regardless of who you work with, this process will really kind of nail down like what's step 1, step 2, step 18, and just kind of get you through your journey as expediently as you'd like. So, Dr. Gary, thanks for being here and letting us pick your brain. I took some notes on some questions that I know are commonly asked, and again, if you guys have anything you want to chime in on, please do. Don't feel like you can't, just shout out what you need. This is your time, okay? So, just a quick overview about when surrogacy and egg donation is a process and a good fit to start a family. Can you just tell us a little bit about that with your experience?
Well, I think in the situation that you're at right now, it depends where you're at in the spectrum of whether you're ready to do this or not. There's a lot of stuff thrown at you today, and I suspect a lot of people here today are sort of in sticker shock or overwhelmed by the amount of information. So it really depends whether you're ready to make that move yet or have had an opportunity to kind of absorb some of the stuff from earlier this morning.
Yeah.
And then, you know, where you're at in your relationship as to whether you're ready to, you know, proceed with the surrogacy at that point.
So AFCC, Advanced Fertility Centers of Chicago, is actually based here with 3 locations. So can you tell us a little bit, just high level, about your practice, especially because you have amazing success rates. And so that's something that I'm an advocate of, making sure you guys know how to choose a clinic. Whether you work with us or not, you need to know one of the most important things is the success of the clinic with an egg donor and with a surrogate. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your clinic because I know how great it is in this area.
Well, it's a practice of 3 physicians, myself, Dr. Catenacci, and Dr. Arani. We do overall IVF about 1,000 cases a year and probably 40 to 50 surrogacies a year on average. We have an office here in the northwest side in Jefferson Park. We have an office in Gurney, which is where our lab is and where the egg donation process would take place, and then an office in Crystal Lake. And as Corrine mentioned, I tell people all the time, depending on where you're at in the process, the key really is to find a program that has good success with egg donation, because ultimately, if you pick a surrogate who's had several children, has been very successful, you're not particularly worried about her ability to have an embryo implant or carry the pregnancy. So it really comes down to what's the quality of the embryo that you're putting in, and that largely is related to what's the quality of the oocytes that you're getting. So a good starting point is to look at the SART data, it's sart.org,
Yep.
and look at the various clinics. SART always says, please don't use this information to compare clinic to clinic, but there's no other way for anybody to do the process. There's no other way to really look at it. And so it's a good starting point. You want to find a program that, like ours, is the top or one of the top programs in the country, and use that in your selection, because you don't necessarily need to do everything in Chicago. You could, for example, choose embryos here, have them frozen, and if you live in Las Vegas or whatever, have the surrogacy in Las Vegas. That can happen. So everything doesn't have to happen in Chicago. So the key starting point, I think, is regardless of where you want to do it, find a program that has good success with egg donation. It's one of the few things that is sort of the gold standard that should be able to compare lab to lab, because if you're doing IVF, you have a 40-year-old woman, there's nothing you can do to change that egg quality. Well, every program should be able to pick young, successful women to be egg donors, and that should be sort of a gold standard that you should be able to compare clinic to clinic to give you an idea of the abilities of the lab, because it really comes down to, in the end, besides picking the egg donor, what is the quality of the lab and how are they able to handle those eggs and those embryos. So it's one of the few things, in many studies they'll use egg donors as sort of the gold standard to try to compare, because it's sort of the one thing you can compare across clinics. There's no patient-to-patient variability, or hopefully none, compared to doing IVF. You're using egg donors that hopefully are young and successful.
You've got a lot of options there. I want to pause and give you guys some thought on that. So sartAsintom.org, great place to start your search. You know, the great thing about being part of a network, let me touch on that for a second. AFCC is part of a larger network called Prelude Fertility. We have literally locations from San Francisco, California to Stamford, Connecticut. The reason that matters for you is that even if you're sitting here today and like Dr. Gary said, you may start the process here, you can complete the process anywhere, and we've got resources to kind of guide you one way or another. So I say look at where you kind of want to be geographically, whether it's here or elsewhere, and start your search through SART that way. Look at the success rates first, and then kind of go to the next step of getting to know the providers. You know, they're amazing providers in this United States, but what's most important is your end goal of what you want to bring home, right? And what matters there is the quality of the lab and the quality of the egg donor. Questions on that part? It's kind of a big part of the process that I think gets overlooked sometimes, or just kind of a checkbox, like, okay, cool, I've talked to someone, I've talked to a doctor, I've heard about some egg donor options. Okay. Interject anytime. So really good point to make there. This is great because it leads right into how does an IVF clinic kind of work with a surrogate and an egg donor, and especially because oftentimes clinics work with agencies, and at clinics like ours, we've got agencies that we've worked with for a long time. We also have the ability to work with an agency that you may already be working with. We're flexible there. Can you walk us through that process?
Right, well, there are several surrogacy agencies that we use. We don't do our own surrogacy for a number of medical and legal reasons, but we use several clinics in Illinois and some of the ones you met today who arrange the surrogacy and screen them. Obviously, ultimately, the physicians are going to look at those surrogates too to make sure they feel like they're a good fit. And then it's really just the screening of the egg donors. Again, you finding which egg donor you want to use, either from our own personal clinic where we have about 200 egg donors, or even part of Prelude Fertility, something called My Egg Bank, which is a national sort of egg bank where programs throughout the country, including Prelude, clinics have donated their eggs. So it sometimes gives you a wider selection. So it really involves screening the egg donors. They go through, obviously, testing for any infectious diseases, family histories. They go through a formal psychological evaluation with a psychiatrist or a psychologist to make sure that they are good candidates, and they are screened again for infectious disease, for nicotine, other things when they start the process as well. So there are quality control spots along the way to make sure that they're good candidates.
That's a really key element of this as well, is like choosing the right surrogate. You know, having a carrier that's a good fit for you is important. Choosing the right egg donor is kind of everything, and we have a lot of quality control there with regards to age, some things about their background, medical history. So I know there's a lot of different, turns to this process, but when you're working with a clinic, you really want to make sure they've got a turnkey egg donor database that's broad enough to kind of give you options. I always say if you're very specific, it may take you a little longer to match with a donor. And if you're more flexible, you may be able to move forward a lot faster. But you've got, I think, the paradox and the joy of choice when you work with a clinic with such a large database and great success with it.
And one of the advantages of our own part of the My Egg Bank is we have sort of local control over our egg donors, and so it's very stringent watching them. But there's also information that helps you when you're selecting an egg donor, especially if they've gone through before. There's information available about what their success rate was with other couples. So it's nice feedback to have to say, okay, this particular egg donor has gone through, and 3 of the people who used her oocytes before had children, so it's helpful in the selection process with our local clinic because we have that feedback.
That's a great point.
So people like to know that. They want to know how successful this egg donor's been before.
Okay, I love it.
What's the optimal age in your point of view for the egg donor?
Good question. Anywhere from about 21 to, arguably 30 would be ideal. I'm always a little bit hesitant to use a 21-year-old because sometimes, depending on the particular individual, and this comes out in the screening process, some 21-year-olds are more mature than others. So ideally, I would say my sort of sweet spot is 25, 26, but certainly 30 or younger we'll use. Sometimes older, sometimes people will use, directed egg donation with a family member. We'll make an exception. But as a rule, ideally 30 or under would be ideal.
Yeah, we use a very rigorous process for that. I would say, what would you say, 1 in 3% of donors actually come through the process?
Maybe as high as 10% make it, but many don't.
So with that, does it not only, it includes a psycho evaluation as well as the medical evaluation?
Yes, they go through a medical evaluation for infectious diseases, and then they go through a formal psychological counseling before they're okayed.
Do you guys know what your local database looks like when it comes to donors here in
Dr.
Chicago?
Jones does.
Well, we have a range of about 200 donors in our own personal egg bank. So about around 200. Again, we have the access to my egg bank. We tend to use our own locally, frankly, because we have such good success rates. We like to sort of keep things under control. There's some things we do a little bit differently. Just as an example, a lot of programs will have the egg donors, do the injections. We actually have the egg donors come into our office, and we give the injections to make sure that everything's done correctly. So you lose some of that quality control and some of the other. So that's not to say that I would prefer to use our local egg bank, but I would say I'd want you to, just because I know how stringent we are in our success rate.
Yeah, and I would say the average clinic, I'm going to speak broadly, probably has between 50 and 100 egg donors in their database at best case scenario. So when you're thinking about, a local provider having over 200 egg donors, it's a big deal. And it's a great deal for you because it gives you, the benefit of choice and being able to really look through that bank. Dr. Jones has a really great coordinator that will help you go through that process of matching, right? So that she can kind of collaborate with you and say, okay, here's what you're looking for. I'm going to select some people that seem like a great fit and put these kind of profiles in front of you. So it's a very systematic, integrated process that you guys have, and it's great for you as intended parents because it's important for you to not just be informed but not be overwhelmed, right? Because you can get stuck in that phase real easily. Depending on how specific you may be.
So in ours is, compared to some of the other programs that are a lot bigger, there's a lot more personal, I have to tell you, it's a lot more personal feeling you're going to get in our clinic versus some of the other ones where they're much larger. Yeah. And Amity is excellent, and she's basically your point of contact, one person and one person only that you're dealing with as far as the whole process. So
it's a huge part of the process, though, is not having, I know I've spoken to many people today where they have multiple points of contact already, just trying to info gather, and that's part of the struggle. It's like, I don't know, it's like planning a wedding and a baby shower and and a funeral all in one, there's so much, to do. And so having someone like Amity who's going to be your point of contact and collaborate with your agency so that legal's taken care of, right? And then have the doctor support and say, okay, Dr. Jones said this, so we've got to get this going. It's huge, and it's something to consider as you're vetting through the process. Last thing I think we'll throw out there and just keep throwing out your questions is if you could share one thing with the group today, knowing the beginning of their journey and knowing what it looks like on the end of their journey, what would you share? Encouragement, anything.
Well, just having children of my own, I just don't think there's anything else in life that brought me the personal reward of children. If I had to choose between being a doctor or being a father, I would be a father first. And I'd give up medicine. If it came to that, I'd give up medicine. So it's a long, tedious process, but the reason I do it is because the joy I see on a daily basis just keeps me going.
That's big, because I know a lot of you are in the beginning, but some of you are in the thick of it. And we want you to know that outcome is possible. And every case is different. So I think sometimes we speak in generalities because that's what we know. But if you've got something that's kind of keeping you from your next step, right? Something that maybe has been identified as like this could be tough, or financing is always a big one. Like, don't let that keep you from your end goal. Keep that. I once worked with someone really influential in this space who said something. She was a coach, and she said something so interesting. She said, if you can wake up every day and these difficult calls, these drives to the clinic, if you can just think of it differently and say, I'm driving to go get my baby. I'm driving to go, get things together for my kid to go to school someday. It's a different perspective, but it's kind of that manifestation in the mind. It seems kind of warm and fuzzy, but you will get there. You believe it. You're here getting the resources that you have, and you have some phenomenal ones. And we would love to be a part of your journey if we can. So we're about right at time. I want to let you know how you can get a hold of us. I've got cards for Dr. Jones here. He's based here in Chicago. If you're not based in the area and you'd like to kind of find out if there's someone in our network we can kind of collaborate you with, I'm happy to do that as well. And we also have, tomorrow there's a lot of information that'll be thrown at you, but we do a follow-up email. It's not spam. It comes directly from us. And it's really just if there's something specific in your care, there's a couple of you we've already met that we can follow up on, we'll be happy to do that. Any last questions?
How long have you guys been in practice?
Oh, a long time. How long have you been in practice?
Almost 30 years.
See, it's a short time.
Working
I'm
on
not
30
a
years.
doctor. I play one on TV.
Long time.
That's a long
25 to
time.
30 years I've been doing this.
Yeah, we've seen the evolution. I've been in this industry for about 10 years, and so I've seen it where, 10 years ago I may have told you that this would be real difficult and, kind of hedge your bets on something else, but I have seen such an amazing transformation in technology, transformation in how we can collaborate with you, and, more and more providers like Dr. Gary really stepping up and saying, this is something I want to do more of, this is something I really want to help with. And then when they specialize their practice, like having a dedicated person is huge. It gives you some of the freedom of having a collaboration and not just a process. So thank you guys so much for your time. We wish you the best in your journey.